Welcome to Theology Made. I'm Jordan, and today we're tackling a topic that's harder than a theological debate about Calvinism and a sauna. The role of science and faith. It's like trying to mix oil and water, except the oil is wearing a lab coat and the water keeps quoting Genesis over and over again. But by the end of this video, you're going to see that just maybe science and faith are not at odds, but the real odd couple. So picture this, it's the 21st century, and we've got smartphones, too many froyo joints, and then no froyo joints overnight. We've got TikTok dances. Meanwhile, we're still trying to figure out how to reconcile the Big Bang with let there be light. It's like we're playing cosmic Tetris and someone keeps handing us pieces from two different sets. Now, before we dive in deeper than the Mariana Trench, let's set the stage. On one side, we've got science, the cool kid with the periodic table, tattoos, and a habit of asking, why? About everything. And on the other side, we have faith, the wise old sage who's seen it all and keeps insisting that there's more to life than meets the eye or the microscope. So let's break down the cage match. First up, we've got the heavyweight title fight, evolution versus creation. It's like Godzilla and Kong going at it, but with more fossils and fewer buildings being smashed. And so we have science in the blue corner, and it's waving its fossil record and DNA evidence like it's a victory flag. It's got Charles Darwin as its corner man whispering sweet nothings about natural selection and common ancestry. And science is pointing to the age of the earth, spoiler alert, it's about 4.5 billion years old, and the diversity of life, saying, look at all this evidence. It's like a cosmic crime scene, and we've got the fingerprints. Meanwhile, faith is in the red corner holding up Genesis and asking, but who set the whole thing into motion, huh? And it's got Bishop Ussher, not Usher, but Ussher, in a corner insisting the earth is only about 6,000 years old, which, spoiler alert, most scientists respectfully disagree. And faith is looking at the complexity of life and the vastness of the universe and saying, come on, you really think this all happened by chance? And then all of a sudden there's a big tornado and a junkyard could assemble a Boeing 747? Boom. So, people in the middle are trying to find some ground with ideas like theistic evolution. It's like saying, hey, maybe God is just really into playing the long game. It's the cosmic equivalent of having your cake and eating it too. And proponents argue that God could have used evolution as a tool for creation. It's like saying God is the ultimate computer programmer and evolution's just the code he used to create life. He didn't have Python at the time. And then others stick to their guns on either side. Young Earth creationists, they are holding on to a literal interpretation of Genesis like it's the last lifeboat on the Titanic, and there is no room on the door for theistic evolution. Meanwhile, some atheist scientists are treating Darwin's On the Origin of Species like it's the ultimate mic drop in the creation debate rather than the conversation starter. But here's where it gets interesting. Some scientists, who are people of faith, argue that science actually strengthens their belief in God. They look at the intricate dance of subatomic particles, the mind-boggling vastness of the universe, the complex beauty of DNA, and they see the fingerprints of a divine creator. It's like they're cosmic Law and Order detectives, and every scientific discovery is another clue pointing towards God. Now, on the flip side, some people of faith are embracing scientific discoveries as a way of better understanding God's creation. They're like the kids with a new Lego set. They're excitedly putting it all together, all the pieces, and then they see the big picture. They argue that if God is the author of both the book of Scripture and the book of nature, then proper interpretation of both should lead to harmony and not conflict. Next up, we've got the battle of the inexplicable. Next up, we have the battle of the inexplicable. Science is all about explaining things, while faith is cool with a little mystery. It's like science is that friend that wants to know how the magician did the trick and then ruins it for you, while faith is just happy to be at the show. And when it comes to miracles, science is scratching its head saying, but that defines the law of physics. Meanwhile, faith is doing a victory dance shouting, that's kind of the point. Science operates on the principle of methodological naturalism. It's like saying we're only going to look for natural explanation for things. It's not saying supernatural explanations are impossible, just that they are outside of science's job description. It's like a plumber saying, I'm only here to fix your pipes, not to discuss your existential crisis. Now, faith, on the other hand, is open to supernatural explanations. It's like having a wild card in your deck. Sometimes you play it, sometimes you don't. And for people of faith, miracles aren't a violation of natural law, but rather a suspension of them by the one who created those laws in the first place. It's like the cosmic game master changing the rules mid-game. I wonder what God's rules for spades are. But here's where it gets tricky. How do we investigate miracles scientifically? Some researchers have tried, and there have been studies on the efficiency of prayer, investigations into alleged miraculous healings, and even attempts to scientifically verify religious relics. But it's kind of like trying to catch lightning in a bottle. Exciting if you succeed, but it's really, really challenging. And let's not forget the philosophical debates. David Hume argued that it is always more rational to disbelieve in miracles than to believe in them. It's like he's saying, look, it's more likely that you've mistaken than the laws of nature have been violated. But on the other hand, C.S. Lewis argues that if God exists, then miracles are possible. It's like saying if there's an author, then he's able to rewrite or put a plot twist into the story. Now here's where things get interesting, is in prayer. Science is all about observable, repeatable actions, verification, validity, reliability. It's like that kid in school who always wanted to check your math. Faith, on the other hand, is cool with some things being unprovable. It's like the friend who believes in luck and always carries a rabbit's foot around. Poor rabbit. But when it comes to prayer, science is asking for double-blind studies and statistical significance. It's like trying to measure love with a ruler. You might get some data, but are you really capturing the essence of it? Now, there have actually been scientific studies on prayer, and some have found positive effects and others have found no effect, and some have found some negative effects. Plot twist, it's like trying to scientifically prove the existence of your imaginary friend. Isn't that right, Fluffy? Faith's approach to prayer is different, though. It's not just about asking for things and seeing if they happen. It's about relationship, about aligning oneself with the divine will. It's like a FaceTime call with the Creator. The value isn't just in what's said, but in the connection itself. But here's where it gets a little mind-bending. What if prayer works in ways that aren't scientifically measurable? What if it's changing the person praying rather than the external circumstance? Almost like a spiritual gym. The results might not show up on a scale, but that doesn't mean nothing's happening over time. And let's not forget about the philosophical implications. If an all-knowing God already knows what we need, why pray? It's like texting someone who's right next to you, which you do all the time if you're married. And some theologians argue that prayer changes us and not God. Others say that God, in his sovereignty, has chosen to work through our prayers. It's like we're co-authors writing the story together. All right. So science can tell us a lot about what is, but it starts to sweat when we ask about what ought to be. The philosophical is and ought. It's like asking your calculator for relationship advice. It might be able to count how many dates you've been on, but it can't tell you if they were the one. Faith, on the other hand, is all about the ought. It's like Miss Manners, always ready with advice on how to behave. And science might be able to clone a sheep, but faith is asking whether we should. And this is where we get into the sticky territory of ethics and morality. Science can inform our ethical decisions by telling us the likely consequences of our actions. It's like having a really smart friend who can predict the future. But science alone can't tell us what's right or wrong. That is where philosophy and religion often step in. But here's where it gets even more interesting. Some scientists argue that we can derive ought from is, using reason and empirical observation. It's like they're trying to build a bridge from the land of facts to the land of values. Philosophers like Sam Harris argue that we can use science to determine human values. Controversial idea, sort of like suggesting that we can solve world peace with a really good spreadsheet. On the other hand, many philosophers and theologians argue that there is a fundamental divide between facts and values that science alone can't bridge. It's like saying there's a leap of faith required to get from this is how the world works to this is how we should behave. And let's not forget the age-old question, if something moral is something moral because God commands it, or does God command it because it's moral? It's the chicken and the egg problem, but with life and death consequences. So, no biggie. And then here's where things get really mind-bending. Science is doing its best to understand consciousness, poking around in our gray matter like it's trying to find the secret sauce. Faith is sitting back and saying, you do realize there's more to us than just our brains, right? Neuroscience has made incredible strides in understanding how our brains work. We can now watch neurons fire in real time. We can map the pathway of thoughts and even influence behavior by stimulating specific brain regions. It's like we've got a front row seat to the greatest show on earth, the human mind. But despite all the progress, the hard problem of consciousness remains unresolved. How does subjective first-person experiences arise from objective physical processes? It's like trying to explain the taste of chocolate to someone who's never eaten it. There seems to be something lost in translation. And this is where people of faith will often step in and say, this is where the soul comes in. They argue that consciousness, or at least some aspect of it, can't be reduced to a mere physical process. It's like they're saying there's a ghost in the machine, and that ghost is what makes us, us. But many scientists and philosophers argue that we don't need to invoke the supernatural to explain consciousness. They say that given enough time and research, we'll crack the code of consciousness just like we cracked the genetic code. It's like they're cosmic code breakers convinced that with some effort, they can decipher the language of consciousness. And then let's not forget the implications of this debate. If consciousness is just a product of physical process, what does that mean for free will, for moral responsibility, for the idea of a soul? It's like we're pulling a thread and the whole sweater of human experience is unraveling. Now here's the kicker. Despite all this WWE-style SmackDown talk, science and faith don't have to be enemies. It's more like they're two kids with different pieces of the same puzzle arguing over what the picture is supposed to be. And throughout history, many scientists have been people of faith. And many people of faith have embraced scientific discoveries. It's like they've realized that the telescope and the prayer book aren't mutually exclusive tools for understanding the universe. Take Georges Lemerite, for example. He was a Catholic priest who first proposed the Big Bang Theory. It's like he looked through his telescope and saw the fingerprints of God. Or consider Francis Collins. He's the former director of the Human Genome Project and a committed Christian. He sees his scientific work as a way of glimpsing into the mind of God. It's like he's reading God's autobiography with the language of DNA. So how do we make these two play nice? Here are some tips. First, recognize their domain. Science is great at answering how questions. Faith tackles the why ones. It's like science is the mechanic explaining how your car works, while faith is helping you figure out where to drive it. Second is embrace the mystery. Not everything has to be explained. It's okay to say, I don't know yet. It's like enjoying a magic show even if you can't figure out how it's done. And then keep an open mind. Both science and faith, they do require a degree of humility. It's like admitting that maybe, just maybe, you don't know everything. Shocking, I know. And then 4, look for harmony and not conflict. Instead of focusing on where science and faith disagree, look for where they complement each other. It's like realizing that peanut butter and jelly are better together than having a food fight with them. And remember the big picture. Both science and faith, they're trying to understand truth. And they're like two different binoculars pointed at the same star. And then engage in dialogue. Encourage conversations between scientists and theologians. It's like arranging a play date for two kids that wouldn't normally hang out, but you might actually be surprised at how well they get along. And appreciate the beauty. Both science and faith can inspire awe and wonder, and whether that's the intricate dance of subatomic particles or the grand narrative of redemption, there's beauty to be found. It's like having two different art styles depicting the same landscape. Each bring out something unique and valuable. And in conclusion, science and faith are like the odd couple in a buddy cop movie. They might bicker, they might have different approaches, but deep down they're both trying to solve the same case, the mystery of existence. And remember, as Galileo, a guy who knew a thing or two about science and faith, said, I do not feel obliged to believe in the same God who has endowed us with sense, reason, and intellect, has intended us to forego their use. It's like God gave us both a lab coat and a Bible, and is wanting to see what we do with them.